Association. And Jenna, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad to speak with you all today about a topic that's pretty important to me. So I'm glad to speak about it. And so this topic was titled Optimal Health, What You Need to Know About Natural Medicines, Diet, and Lifestyle. So we'll kind of talk about all of those sorts of things. So let's first talk a little bit about me. Who am I? So I'm Dr. Jenna Carmichal. I went to the University of Arizona for pharmacy school, and I completed 2 years of postgraduate residency training. Specifically, my second year was in oncology. And then I spent about 5 years working at Geisinger Health System as a clinical oncology pharmacist, and I specialized in managing patients who were taking oral chemotherapy agents. And so I had all kinds of side effect management experience in that position. I also spent some time recently working in the cannabis industry and the pharmaceutical industry. So I have a whole kind of humongous knowledge base of all the different kinds of sides of the healthcare system. And right now I'm working for myself. I own my own business and it's called Wobbly Arrow Wellness. And I am a holistic oncology pharmacist and a health coach. And I work with people who are on cancer treatment to help them navigate through this journey of cancer treatment. And so a lot of the times when I'm talking with my patients and clients, we talk about kind of what are the diet and lifestyle things that I need to be doing to make sure that I am at my optimal health and that sort of idea. So then the question is really, what is optimal health, right? So if we're thinking about what optimal health is, then let's kind of think about what are the factors that go into play here. And so in my opinion, the factors that go into optimal health are going to be things like family history, your genetic makeup, the things that we eat and how we actually eat those things, our relationships with ourselves, with other people, how much stress we have in our lives and how we deal with that. Making sure that we have some kind of daily exercise and movement program that's a part of our day. And also kind of looking at our mental health and making sure that we're doing things to improve our own mental health. And I added this picture in because I thought it was really cute, but I think it's also this idea of not taking yourself too seriously. I think that's the other part of optimal health is, we can't really be so serious and all the time. We have to kind of have a little bit of fun and a little bit of lightheartedness when we think about our lives as well. So in my opinion, when we're thinking about this, then the goal really is to have an understanding of what our personal risks are, so then we can make an informed decision about our health. And to me, that really comes back to this idea of, we recall Hamlet and Shakespeare of to thine own self be true. So how do we know what our own personal risks are? How do we find those things? And then we can account for those through diet and lifestyle ideas. And so what do I mean by that? And so I'll give you some examples for myself. So in my family history, we have heart disease in my family. And I know that it's on my mother's side, particularly my grandfather passed away from congestive heart failure. And I know that my mother also has a little bit of heart trouble as well. And the other thing that I know is as a pharmacist and who works in oncology, I'm really super into genetic testing. And so I personally have had genetic testing done on myself, a variety of different things. And recently I was able to kind of do some nutrient testing based on my genes. And so this genetic testing actually found out that I have a potential based on my genes to have a deficiency in certain nutrients related to heart health, specifically DHA, iron, and copper for myself. And I think CoQ10 when I was looking at these reports. And so having this information then allows me to then think about, okay, how am I going to prevent heart disease? How am I going to focus on my heart health, knowing that these are potential issues for me personally coming up in my life? And so because I have this genetic testing that tells me what specific nutrients I might be at risk to be deficient in, of course, I'm going to make sure that I have those types of nutrients and things in my diet to make sure that I get those trace minerals. And also, we really want to think about a variety of vegetables and things, and we're going to talk about diet in a little bit. The other thing to think about specifically when we think about heart disease too is we want to strengthen the muscle of the heart. And so that, of course, would be through exercise. So meaningful movement, which in my case is yoga, walking, Tai Chi, all of those sorts of things are really amazing movement strategies to help. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as well. Other example would be from myself would be that I have a dementia risk in my family as well. So in my family, on my mother's side, my grandmother had dementia. She lived very long. She was 96 when she passed away. And on my father's side, I actually have early onset Alzheimer's in my grandfather. And then my grandmother also lived to be 96, but also had some age-related memory issues as well. And so knowing again that I have this risk of dementia, of brain instability, of things, particularly knowing that most of my income in my life is going to come from what gets produced in my brain, I'm really interested in making sure that my brain is working at its top performance as possible. And so for me, that means then thinking about, okay, so I want to do lifestyle interventions to decrease my amount of stress and burnout. So does that mean that I meditate more or I add more self-care to my life? Do I try to really look about what my work environment is like? Am I in a very stressful work environment, or am I setting up my life that is a little bit less stressful? Because we've had a lot of stress going on in our lives the last couple of years. And I think that's what we're seeing in this great resignation, right? Everybody's kind of burnt out at work. They've had a lot of things going on. And so they're kind of reevaluating for themselves what really is important to me. And I think that that's really something that everybody should be thinking about. What's important to you? And so, of course, meditation and mindfulness practices have been shown clinically to be very helpful with mood, with brain function, and those sorts of things. And then we can also supplement with herbs. So we can add things like mushrooms. We can add other things that are going to increase our brain's abilities. And so at the beginning of this talk, we kind of talked about natural medicines, diet and lifestyle. So I wanted to kind of give you guys an explanation to what I feel like would be how to define these terms. So that way we can kind of talk about what are the things that reside within these terms. And so when I talk about natural medicine, what I think of as natural medicine, that would be things like supplements or herbs, teas or tinctures, any product that would be derived from an herb, a mineral, plant, flower, or fruit. So these are going to be things that you can turn into teas, you can purchase at the health food store, all of those sorts of products. Now, the thing to be concerned about, or the thing to be aware about when we're talking about natural medicines, is that a lot of times these agents are not specifically regulated by the FDA. Now, the FDA is going to make sure that your supplement manufacturer isn't going to make any claims about the agent that are false. So a supplement manufacturer can't claim that something is going to cure cancer, for example, unless they have valid, good evidence to back up that assertion. And so in a way that's nice, but that also kind of doesn't help us a little bit too much, because then that can make things a little difficult in terms of a consumer to figure out, okay, what do I really use milk thistle, for example? I hear this idea of milk thistle, but what do I actually use that for? And unfortunately, that type of information isn't going to be easily available on your package when we're talking about natural medicines. Now, when we're talking about pharmaceutical drugs, we have good manufacturing practices, and these are things that are FDA regulated to ensure that when you say that there's 10 milligrams of a blood pressure medication in that pill, every single pill that comes off the line from that manufacturer is going to have the same amount of medication in it. Unfortunately, that sort of idea isn't always translated over into the supplement and natural medicine world. And so, unfortunately, that means then as a consumer, you need to do your own research and your own kind of safety and quality control when it comes to figuring out a good manufacturer. Now, of course, you can talk to your local pharmacist or you can talk to your other healthcare practitioners in terms of brands that could be useful, but really a lot of times we don't really know unless it's a good quality brand that does this kind of secondary testing on their products to say, if you tell me that there's 500 milligrams of something in this pill, is there really 500 milligrams in this pill? And so that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about natural medicines. Now, when I was in pharmacy school, this alone was one of the big reasons why we were always kind of told to poo-poo the natural medicine world, that, you know, we don't really know what's in these supplements. We don't know if they're just a fancy placebo or whatnot. And so a lot of times I was taught, we don't really, you know, trust these sorts of things. But the thing that I have learned now working in natural medicines is that there are good quality manufacturers out there. You just have to find them. There are amazing, wonderful humans that work in this area that make wonderful, amazing products. And so it is easily able to find these things, but you do kind of have to search for it. But the thing to think about as well is that when we're talking about herbs and plants, these are things that humans have been utilizing for generations, for hundreds of years, even thousands of years, depending on what type of system you're looking at. And so in my book, if it's been used successfully by humans for hundreds of years, I'm going to say that that's probably a good quality plant as long as we know what we're kind of doing with it and that it does have use for it. But we do need to have the right people to understand those plants and those products to kind of help people along and to find the right things for them. Now, interestingly, we have found that a lot of pharmaceutical products that we have on the market these days have been originally inspired by plants. And so we really can't get away too far from plants when we're talking about pharmaceuticals either. So when we talk about diet and lifestyle, I know as a healthcare practitioner, we got hammered into us a lot, diet and lifestyle, but they don't really tell us too much about what that actually means. And so when I talk with my clients in particular, they really are interested in what are the things that I can eat now that I have cancer? What are the things that I can do to make sure that the side effects and things that I have could potentially be less? And that's all within this diet and lifestyle realm. But when they talk to their physicians about this, the physicians don't really care or know too much about this subject because it's not really in their wheelhouse. The physicians are there to know the drugs, they're there to note and diagnose you, but really they don't really have a lot of training and background in diet and lifestyle, unfortunately. So what do we mean then by diet and lifestyle? Diet and lifestyle is what you eat, where the food comes from, and how it was prepared. So was there did you have food that was chemically treated with pesticides? Because that's what a lot of conventional food these days are being treated with, glyphosate, Roundup products that we know have been linked to chemical interruptions in our bodies with cancer development, that sort of thing. And that's very common in the food system these days. The other thing to think about too is what is the relationship that you actually have to that food? So I'm a person that has a very long history of dieting. And so for a long time, everything that I put in my body had a moral compass to it. Is this something that is, quote, good for me? Is this something that is, quote, bad for me? And having that idea when you label your food like that can also incorporate those dieting ideas and mindset, that scarcity to your life. And so that can be very unhelpful in that regard. Other things to think about would be a daily movement practice that includes strength and flexibility training. And that could be things like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. These are all great, meaningful movement practices that incorporate all of those things, but they're not super impactful on your joints like running is, or other sorts of things that can be, that can potentially harm more than they do good. Another thing to think about is we have a lot of stress in our lives these days. And so we need to find ways to manage that stress that allows for that release of anger and frustration in a healthy way. I know that I have seen, unfortunately, in myself, unhealthy releases of anger and frustration, particularly when I'm stressed out at work and other things like that. And so, can we find ways that help us manage stress? And is that through meditation? Is that through, actually a couple weeks ago, I had a really horrible week and I did an axe throwing kind of thing at one of those axe throwing places. And I got to tell you, when I walked out of that place, I felt pretty darn good to just get that anger and frustration out in a healthy way, because at least you know that like through that physicality of your body, you're releasing that in a way that's much healthier than screaming at your coworkers or your family members. Other things to think about, in my opinion, would be supportive and fulfilling relationships that uplift. An example that I use a lot when I talk to my clients is that we know, for example, chemotherapy causes a lot of nausea and vomiting. We know that specifically that's a side effect from the drug. But we also know that if you had a tumultuous relationship in your life, you could have an upset stomach, you could have some anxiety related to that. And so if you added that on top of having a drug that potentially could give you nausea and vomiting, we're potentially increasing that nausea and vomiting. We're also potentially causing that nausea and vomiting that is harder to treat, right? Because we can't just give a pill for something that's going to fix a tumultuous relationship. As much as we would love to have a pill that could do that, we unfortunately don't have that. And so having an idea of those relationships that are in our lives, those could be family relationships, they could be friends. It's those people that we surround ourselves with. Are those people supportive, or are those people kind of tearing us down? Because that is really important in terms of our longevity and in terms of just how we feel overall. Screen-free rest and downtime is going to be really important, particularly in our Zooming sort of culture we have these days. And really, if we could get that in nature, that would be preferable as well, because we have this disconnect now with the natural world that what I've been reading and what I've seen in my own life too is that disconnecting from the natural world, as humans, we've always lived in nature. We've always been outside. And so I feel like there is some kind of longing sometimes that we have for being out in nature, for smelling that fresh smell of the earth sometimes. And I'm a total earth girl, so that could just be me though. Having restful and supportive sleep is important. I think that a lot of people feel that I can make up my sleep tomorrow or over the weekend. And the data actually doesn't prove that. It actually takes us multiple days of full rest to make up for even just one missed hour of sleep. And so this idea of like, oh, don't worry, I'll make it up later. Unfortunately, when it comes to sleep, isn't really there. And your sleep is super important. We know that you make a lot of hormones during your sleep, that you process your memories, you put short-term memory into long-term memory during your sleep. And so having a restful, long enough sleep is also really important as well to your overall health. Finding a way to have a positive outlook or a mindset is also really important. Having to be that person who's that glass half full rather than glass half empty is a really important thing too, because that pulls that positive energy into your life. And so that can help uplift you rather than always pulling in that negative and those negative consequences to yourself all the time. And then a lot of times when you look at traditional healing systems, there is some discussion about what your poop looks like. Are you having regular bowel movements? Are they well formed? Are you not straining with that? So, are you not constipated? Is it not too loose? Having some sort of regular gut movement is also usually a part of this idea of optimum health. So we talked about a lot of things, right? And so that can be really overwhelming. Here we went through this giant list of all these things that, if everybody was doing amazingly well, we would have optimum health. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not doing all of those things on a consistent basis, because health is a journey. Health is something that, we do as we can, and to try to start too many things to quote get healthy can sometimes really just push us off into the deep end. We get really overwhelmed, and then we all just kind of go back to what we were doing because that's safe and that's easy and that's what we know. So let's talk about kind of if we were thinking about either continuing on this journey towards health, if we were thinking about starting on a new journey, where is it that we would be thinking about? So again, first steps here. You don't have to be perfect now or ever. As somebody who has considered herself a perfectionist for most of her life, this idea of perfect is not going to ever happen, particularly in a human system. It just doesn't work. And so have some grace, have some compassion for yourself and your journey, because today you were a little better than yesterday, and tomorrow you're going to be a little better today. And that's really all that we can do right now when we're talking about a journey. The other thing to think about is, again, we don't want ourselves to get overwhelmed. And so we know that humans are not great multitaskers. There's a lot of data to suggest that our brains just can't really switch around from thing to thing very easily. And so let's just pick on something that's easy to do and that's in that low hanging fruit category. So if you're thinking about, maybe I should really get on a better sleep schedule, go for that. If you're thinking, I really think I would love to find some way of exercising that I enjoy, cool, go for that. These are things and habits that we're looking at to implement into the rest of our lives. And so being able to find these things that are working for you, that's really what's important here. And the other thing to think about too is potentially there are ways that we can kind of have one habit do multiple things for us. So we know that adding like a meaningful movement practice, such as yoga, such as qigong, tai chi, these both add exercise, but they also add stress management to your life, because these practices incorporate a lot of breath work, which breath work a lot of times will help with stress management. It helps you release those things that are causing you the stress, that are making you angry, all those sorts of things. And so adding that, a lot of people find that any kind of exercise usually helps with their mood. And so if that's something that you're looking for, that could be a good reason to start something like that. Screen-free downtime could also be something that you could combine right before you go to sleep. And by adding that in, that can also induce a more restful sleep, because that blue light from the screens can trigger your brain into thinking that it's not time to go to bed yet, even though it is. And so by helping your body wind down with either a bedtime routine of some nature, that sort of idea, that really can set you up for success when it comes to sleep. And then another thing to think about could be screen-free downtime while you're in nature. So there's this idea of forest baths, which I think is really kind of cool. So, you go out into the forest and you just stand out there and enjoy and listen to the sound of the wind as it goes through the forest and what is going on, and you just enjoy it. And that can help release stress, of course, and that's getting away from those screens and getting away from all of that potentially negative feedback loop that a lot of times we get into when we're on social media and other sorts of screen time sort of ideas. And so if we were thinking specifically about what kind of diet and lifestyle recommendations I personally give to my clients. This is one of the things that I definitely say. We've talked about a bunch of these: managing stress, getting exercise, preferably in nature. One of the things I do talk about a lot with my clients is eliminating ultra processed foods, which are going to be things that are going to be pretty much anything. If you go to the grocery store, that's going to be anything that's on the inside aisles, compared to all the outside aisles are generally not going to be your super processed foods. Those super processed foods are going to be anything that comes in a bag or a package. If you look at that ingredient list and there's more than just, say, if you were going to look at a bag of beans, for example, dried beans, right, it would just say dried navy beans on there. But if you looked at something that had soup, a can of soup, for example, that could have navy beans, but it can have 20 billion other ingredients in there, along with stabilizers and other sorts of things, that what the data really is showing us is that they promote disease, these having all of this extra sugar, all of this extra fat in your diet. And it's also more the chemicals, it's the GMOs, the chemicals, all those things in those products we know have been linked to cancer risk, have been linked to other inflammatory diseases. And so if we can limit that, that's really going to be overall long-term a really good, healthful thing that we can do. In terms of what is the best diet, I get asked that a lot. And I can't tell you that there's going to be one diet that is best for everybody, because everybody's so different. And so really what we have to think about are, what are the things that are important to you when it comes to a diet? And that could incorporate things like, I really don't like this type of food, or I'm allergic to this type of food. I recently found out that I'm pretty sensitive to wheat and gluten, and I've been a bread person my entire life. And so now I have to really think about how much gluten and wheat I have in my diet, because I don't have to completely cut it out. But that also then means, okay, so I have to think about other ways to get starches and things in my diet that aren't wheat related. Overall, I would say, let's focus on vegetables, eating more vegetables in general than meat. But where you get those vegetables and who grows those vegetables is really important when it comes to that nutrient density and the ability to get all of that amazing benefits from your fruits and vegetables. And so conventionally grown fruits and vegetables that are sprayed with herbicides and pesticides are actually less nutritious, because what we're finding is that having that weed pressure, having those insect and bird pressure, that promotes the plant to actually make more of those good antioxidants, because the antioxidants are there as a mechanism of the plant to protect itself from the plants, from the insects. And so if that pressure isn't there because we've sprayed away everything else, then that actually makes a plant that potentially isn't as nutritious as it could be if we were utilizing more sustainable farming practices. I'm not a person that says no meat, but I do recommend that you understand where your meat comes from. There is a lot of information about factory farming that really shows us that there really isn't a good, the animal isn't respected. And that's not what you want. If you're going to be consuming that animal, we want to make sure that the animal is respected, that they died in a respectful manner, and that as much as possible that they didn't suffer or have anxiety or fear. Because it's actually kind of funny, in Japan, that is important to them because they feel that that actually makes the meat taste differently. They feel that adding stress and fear to, say, a tuna, when we're talking about sushi in Japan, that's very important. So they want to make sure that when you're utilizing animal flesh, that we are killing them in a very humane way, so that as much as possible, there isn't that stress. Because it can affect flavor, but really it's more about being humane and being responsible to the entities and the things that we are and putting in our body, right? Because if we think about, I'm a big person about energy. And so if you think about the energy of those substances that you take into your body, you're taking in potentially stress then if you're eating an animal that was stressed when it passed away. And so kind of thinking about that idea, that's where when I'm thinking about my own food, I really want to make sure that I know the farmer. And since I live in a rural area, I can do that, right? And so I actually talk to my farmers. I purposefully buy vegetable shares and community supported agricultural shares that I know that the farmer uses organic practices or is certified organic. And I know where the animals that I purchased are, if I had a pig or other things, because we have a big freezer in our house. And so kind of really understanding that when you're adding that nutrition into your body, how can we get that most robust, nutritious food that we possibly can? All right. So let's set ourselves up for success. So here are some thoughts about how we can kind of make it easier for ourselves to start with these new habits. So there's this idea that's called habit stacking. And the idea is to take something that you really, really enjoy and do it with something that you kind of moderately enjoy. So a lot of times that could be something like if you love a specific TV show or you want to listen to a specific audiobook, or if you really love a podcast or something like that, some kind of entertainment, you could make a deal with yourself to say, I'm only going to use that or listen to that when I'm on the treadmill. And so then you're saying to yourself, okay, I can only watch, Grey's Anatomy, for example, if I'm on the treadmill or if I'm on the stationary bike. And eventually over time, what that begins is that then you kind of get that excitement to be like, oh, I get to go on the exercise bike tonight because now I have to see what happens on the next episode of whatever it is, right? And so that can be a way to help kind of make it a little more enticing if you don't necessarily like to exercise, because not everybody does. Another thing to do would be to make it easier for yourself. So if you wanted to go to the gym in the morning before work, or if you wanted to get up and walk around the block first thing in the morning, put your exercise clothes out the night before. So then all you have to do is get up, get dressed, don't even have to think about it, and you're out the door before you even realize what's going on. That's the nice thing. Or if you are looking to go to the gym or do something after work, pack a bag so that way you have it in the car, and then that way you don't have that excuse of, oh, I don't have enough time to go home and change. Too bad, it's already there for you. The other thing to think about too, though, is we have to make our health a priority. So you have to make your health and yourself a priority. So schedule that self-care, schedule that rest, that downtime that everybody needs, even though we all tell ourselves that we don't. Schedule that and put that in your calendar and keep it as an appointment with yourself. That's the thing that I always have a problem with, is that I'll put things in my calendar, but if it's an appointment with me, the only person that I'm going to disappoint is me. I'm not disappointing somebody else, but kind of really, make this a priority to have that rest, to have that downtime, to go to the salt cave, to get a massage, get your nails done, whatever it is that is rejuvenating for you. That's something to make sure that you put into your overall health plan. And realize too that caring for yourself is not selfish, because we cannot help others. We cannot give if we have an empty cup. We cannot give to others if our cup is not overflowing. And the only way to do that is by first filling the cup first for ourselves. So then that way we can care for others. The other thing to think about is, how can we make this interesting and fun? So could you challenge yourself to say that today I'm going to eat one thing that represents every color of the rainbow? And so then I'm going to kind of go through and go, okay, what did I eat that was red? Okay, what did I eat that was purple? What did I eat that was this? And at least that makes getting those vegetables and those other things in your diet a little more fun, because now you're doing it by color rather than, okay, I need X amount of servings of fruits and vegetables today and burr, burr, burr. And that's just not all that exciting. So try to make it fun. And I think too, like exercise is always a hard thing for a lot of people. And so how can we find exercise that is exciting to you? So if you are somebody who likes to dance, can you find a dance class for adults, ballroom dancing, tap dancing, whatnot? But that's a great way to get some exercise, but it's also in a way that's fun. And it is a way that then you would continue to do it. All right. So I've talked a lot about all the variety of things. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know that it sounds like I've got some people who came here specifically with questions. So I'm very excited, and fire away.
I have questions about probiotics and prebiotics. I try to drink a lot of kombucha and eat kimchi, and I use miso a lot. But my question is, and I've read conflicting things, and I got to find the correct answer. Can you heat miso without destroying its healthy qualities? Because I put it in, I make miso soup all the time, but I'm thinking, oh, I'm boiling the soup and it's killing all the good good
Right.
activity here. But
Yeah,
you can.
so generally I wouldn't, like, you could heat it, but I wouldn't boil it.
Okay.
Because once you get up to that boiling temperature, then it will kill off the pathogens, because boiling, that's how we know through our canning practices, by boiling, we're going to kill things off. Usually, if I were to make miso soup, I generally add that miso in at the very, very end, right before I serve it. Because you want to protect as much as possible those probiotics and those benefits, and they can be heated, but I wouldn't boil them.
So what about, sometimes I use it as like a marinade on top of salmon that I'm going to bake. But now it's going to be bacon in the oven. Is that going to kill all the good activity there?
Yeah, probably. But I would also say that just because there aren't active good microbes in that, you're still getting good benefits from the miso itself, right? So the miso is a fermented soy product. When we talk about cancer risk, there's been, ups and downs about, does soy increase cancer risk? Does it decrease cancer risk? What we've actually found now is that soy is good. Soy does decrease your cancer risk, particularly when you have it in forms like miso and in soy milk, and other things like tofu is another one too. But yeah, you're still going to get those good benefits, but it's not going to be that full, robust repopulation of your gut sort of benefit.
Yeah, I had a question. I had podiatrists tell me that if I increase my vitamin B, and I don't know which one he said it was, that it would help repair nerve damage.
Okay.
Do you know what would be the best thing to eat or whatever?
Yeah, so that's probably B6. And so any kind of B complex, B12 is another one that you associate with numbness and tingling as well. So anything that's going to have B12 or B6 in it. So that could be just a general B complex sort of supplement, but B vitamins you're going to find in your green leafy vegetables. So if you're into spinach and kale, those sorts of things, that's a great B supplement. What is it? There's a yeast,
Nutritional yeast?
Yeah, nutritional yeast is actually, that's full of B vitamins. And so that actually can be another good one as well.
What herbs would you recommend for just, person of average health who just wants to keep, optimum health? What would you recommend?
Oh, there's so many. So I really like herbs to kind of specifically kind of look at what are we thinking about, right? And the
Mhm.
class of herbs that generally would be great for overall health and wellness would be this class of herbs that are called adaptogens. And they have they're kind of getting a lot more press these days because they help the body adapt to stress or adapt to changing environments and those sorts of things. And so what is in the realm of adaptogens are holy basil or tulsi is a great one. Milky oats is another good one. Gotu kola is another good one. These guys are all great to help with stress. They're good to help with kind of clearing the brain. You know, a lot of times people have kind of brain fog a lot of times. And so generally those are the kind of things I like those in teas personally. I am a big herbal tea drinker. And so I usually throw those in a big concoction of tea that I drink throughout the day because that's kind of my MO, but you can get those in, you could put those in food because milky oats are actually the same thing as oatmeal. They're just a different stage in the growth development, but we know that oats in general are really great nervine agents. They're helpful to help with any kind of nervousness or that sort of thing. And so adaptogens in general are going to be great. I usually also recommend like a greens powder for people just because I feel like we don't get enough green leafy vegetables. And by adding in those greens powders, that adds in a lot of those nutrients that a lot of times we're not getting from our day-to-day diet. And that helps too with energy. A lot of people have low slumps in energy. And by adding in all those vital nutrients, that could help with that.
Jenna, you mentioned holy basil, milky oats, and a third one. I didn't.
Milky oats. Oh, Gotu kola. GOTUKOLA.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Gotu kola actually you can grow as a house plant. I haven't tried that yet, but it's possible. The holy basil or tulsi, that's the other word for it. That one, it grows just like a regular basil plant. So I grow that one in my garden every year. It's a little more anisey flavor than your like sweet basil that you use for pestos and things, but I really, really like it a lot. I think another thing to think about too would be that's not an herb, but vitamin D is another good one to think about, particularly because we spend so much time indoors that our body's mechanisms to make vitamin D just don't have as much exposure to the sunlight as much anymore. And there's a lot of information to suggest that having an adequate level of vitamin D is very beneficial and that a lot of disease that we're seeing could be related to a low level of vitamin D. And when you're taking a D supplement, you want a D3, not a D2.
Thank you.
Here's a question I'm afraid to ask.
Uh-oh.
I'm not real good with eating good stuff as much as I should, but here's my question. What's your feeling on vitamins? For example, when Jerry talked about the B vitamins, that's why they made stress tabs. I've read articles back and forth that, yeah, vitamins are good. No, vitamins aren't. Yeah, there's a little bit of nutrients that you may not pick up. What is your feeling on vitamins?
I am pro vitamin because I feel that we aren't getting as much vital nutrients from our food as we have been in the past. These conventional growing practices have also taken a lot of the nutrient density from the soil. And so there just really isn't as much nutrient density within even the organic fruits and vegetables that we're getting. And so getting a high quality multivitamin, if you need a B complex, those sorts of things, getting those in your system, I think are really important to that overall health. And unfortunately, right now, the information that I'm seeing, we're just not going to be able to get that solely from diet right now.
By the way, I will say, I spent some time really diving deeply into the whole vitamin D thing. And I myself personally have seen that vitamin D levels, adequate ones, are important to help with COVID. And what I really liked was you can get vitamin D levels taken in your blood work. And in fact, my endocrinologist was the one who told me about this. And so at least yearly get my vitamin D levels taken, but you can actually see if you're getting enough or not. So I agree 100% with vitamin D. I do have another question. You talked about genetic testing.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that I got involved with was actually Medicare fraud. And there are some genetic companies that actually are using genetic testing to scam people.
Yes,
Especially
I've
the
definitely
one.
heard about
So,
this. Yeah.
so my question is how, so just for the rest of the group, there's some groups that'll come in, especially they wheedle their way into some of these health fairs. They tell people, hey, if you care about your kids and you want to see if you have a cancer gene, send us the information, give us your Medicare number, and we'll do it for free. Yeah. And anyway, there's a lot of that, but you mentioned that you did it. So how does one access reliable, trustworthy genetic testing? Because there are scammers out there.
Yes, I agree with that. And there are tons of genetic testing these days. And so I offer, actually through my practice, I offer pharmacogenomic testing, which is a specific type of genetic testing that looks at how your liver and how your body processes medications. And so that is a different type of testing. And so the other types of testing are things like your ancestry testing, where it is that your family came from and based on your DNA. And then those same companies now are getting into the health field. And so they're also saying, okay, based on your genes, these are the types of things that we know based on genes. A lot of those companies, so like 23andMe, Ancestry.com, those guys, I actually think that they're pretty good. These are direct to consumer companies. So you're paying probably, depending on if you get a coupon, anywhere from like $150 to $250 for a panel that gets run. And that'll do mostly kind of your ancestry. You can add on the health stuff. And I've done that. And actually through that, I found out that I had a clotting disorder potential, which was actually really interesting. And through subsequent testing has actually been found out to be true. But then the interesting thing that I have found about this 23andMe, this kind of testing, it's a really easy cheek swab test. So it's not a blood test or anything like that. But you then can download your genome and then you can populate it in a different company. And so that's kind of what I did to find out this nutrigenomic testing. And so I had my 23andMe testing done years ago and had that. And then recently was able to download that data because of course your genes don't change. And so I downloaded that data and was able to populate it because what we do know with genes and genetic testing is that more information is coming out all the time to really show us what genes are associated with specific diseases and what ones aren't. And it's hard because as a genetic test, so the company I used to work for, Geisinger, they did their own genetic testing. And one of the things that they always talked about was this idea of, should we be telling somebody, for example, that they're at a higher risk of developing schizophrenia or Alzheimer's disease when we don't really have any good treatments that would actually prevent that from happening? And so is that then potentially making somebody worse off? Because if we're going to tell you that you are, you have this one gene that is potentially going to make you have Alzheimer's disease in 20 or 30 years, how's that 20 or 30 years going to be until you get to that place? Could you potentially always be worried about this idea that, oh, I could be getting Alzheimer's? Some people feel that way. Other people use that as a very empowering term to say, okay, I know that this is my risk. And now I'm going to do absolutely everything possible that I can to make sure that this doesn't happen. Because what we do know about genetic testing is that genes will just tell you what's possible. They don't tell you that it's, yes, absolutely going to happen. The things that make your genes turn into what ends up happening is that diet and lifestyle. So if we know that you have this gene that potentially could increase your risk of cancer, increase your risk of heart attacks or whatever, that's fine. But it doesn't guarantee that you're going to develop that thing. And so what helps with that is the dietary changes that we make, the exercise things that we do, the stress management, that sort of thing. Those are all really important to helping your genes being translated. And so that's kind of what I would look for when I'm thinking about genetic testing. You're wanting somebody to actually do the test and then help you understand what those results are. So that's the important part too, is sure, we can get your genetic testing done, but if there is no way for you as the consumer or you as the patient to also get that information for yourself, then that to me sounds like a scam.
Thank you.
Harry, do you have any questions?
Not much I can think of. It occurred to me to ask the lady if I was puzzled unduly when the doctor one time told me that my veins were too close together. And I don't know, he just told me I had very close veins. Oh, that's a joke, people, that's a joke.
It crossed my mind because Jerry is quite, or excuse me, Harry's quite the punster. So Jenna, thank you very much. There's a couple of things I'd like to mention. I'm a retired cardiology PA.
Okay.
I suck at pharmacology. Great respect for how much you did. I'm dyslexic, and boy, when I started getting into those generic names that we had to go with, and you know, there's only one letter difference between some of those. that was the class I struggled with the most. And I did a preceptorship in Shamokin, so I smiled when you said Geisinger, because I'd never even heard of Shamokin before then. Really, really great internal medicine guy. I just wanted to mention, as far as natural medications, that you need to be careful if you're taking other prescribed medications, because one of the issues with natural medications is that for the most part, there are no controlled studies because there's not enough money to be made for them to do studies. So for example, I'm on Coumadin because I have a mechanical heart valve, and that Coumadin is interactive with a lot of different things. Vitamin K is the big one. I have to be very careful about my green intake, or it throws off my level too much or too little. But if you're taking a bunch of other medication, it's really important to have somebody, and this sounds like something that Jenna might be able to do, to see whether or not you have an interaction with those things if you're on prescribed medication. And again, I knew that before, but certainly it's taken on more of a personal thing in the last 10 plus years. The other thing is, I'd be interested what started your grandfather ending up with CHF, because CHF is an end diagnosis. It doesn't say what got to that point. And mostly we look at the risk factor being if it happened when they were less than 65 years old. So if he lived to 90 and had a heart attack, you're good. And then you didn't mention your mom's heart problem. And I would just want to say, rather than strengthen the heart, I would like to just put out elasticity of the vessels and watching your endothelial tissue are the really big things. So that's the avoiding of tobacco, watching your blood sugar, looking at your lipids, because it's the blood supply to the heart muscle that is what gets blocked when you, for example, have a heart attack. So that's when you get an, I'm a whenever I was lecturing, my big thing that apparently I was the only one that brought up on a consistent basis was endothelial tissue. It's like one of my big things because nobody talks about it, and it's so incredibly important because that is the single cell barrier that is between your circulating blood and your blood vessels. And it is when that endothelial tissue is broken down. And I like to describe it as picture it like, the paper you stick in presents. I'm going blank on the.
Oh yeah, tissue paper.
Tissue paper, thank you. That how much, if you just pull on it a little bit, it'll separate. And some of the things that weaken that is high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and tobacco smoke. And that gets into a whole thing. And if you watch your vascular health, that's also going to decrease your chance of stroke and peripheral vascular disease and renal artery disease. And the other thing, Jenna, for you that I'm sure you probably know, that if your mom had a heart problem, you might tend a little bit more towards getting hormone replacement than maybe somebody else would, simply because that has a huge factor to do on elasticity. And it's the loss of the estrogen after you go through menopause, after about 10 years, that women's heart risk is as bad as a man's, because they lose that protection of the hormones. And then my last thing, and then I'll shut up, is I would say with the strength and flexibility that you also need to do aerobic exercise, because that's part of what's going to keep the elasticity and the vascular health, is not so much the strength and do as I say, not as I do. I do yoga virtually every day. I try to walk, but not as often as I should. I can't get my heart rate up. But aerobic exercise is really, really important. And on the vitamin D thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the last things that I've been seeing is 15 minutes of sun a day in that window of like 10 to 3 or so without sunblock on is your optimal amount. And that there's actually more, and you would know this being in oncology, my understanding is there's more cancers in above the Mason-Dixon line than there are below the Mason-Dixon line. And one of the main thoughts of that is a lack of vitamin D, because obviously we don't get as much sunshine up here as they do down in the southern states. And you're nodding, so I assume that means it's correct.
Yeah, and actually, and I think a lot of that is changing too, because I studied in Arizona, and you would think that with all that sunshine out there that you would have people with normal vitamin D levels. And I did a rotation at an independent pharmacy, and they did hormone replacement and a lot of times checked vitamin D. And I was really surprised because practically everybody had a low vitamin D level. And that's just because you're in Arizona, you just get hammered so much about sunscreen, because heaven forbid you would get melanoma, because we're so concerned about cancer, but we're forgetting that sun is really, really vitally important for our overall health and well-being. And that really your risk of skin cancer compared to the risk of, not feeling as amazing as you possibly could, that just is so different. Yeah. And you brought up so many good points. Yes, for certain. If you're on any kind of prescription medication and you want to start on any kind of herbs, 100% talk to your provider, talk to a pharmacist, somebody who can definitely make sure that there aren't going to be any troubles. And warfarin is the gold standard when it comes to interacting with other things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't use that when we're utilizing things like Coumadin. In the most part, I mean, there are obviously some things that we're like, absolutely not. But for a lot of times when I was managing my patients that were on warfarin and Coumadin, I would kind of just tell them, hey, be consistent. Consistency is more important. If you want to eat salads, great, but you just got to do it 5 times a week, every single week. And that's cool. And we can dose around that, but we just got to make sure that we're consistent with that. So yeah, I agree with that.
I have a funny story on that. And a guy that was in our Coumadin clinic who was coming in with these wildly bizarre INRs, and obviously we treat that, and and then it would be, and then it turns out that he was intermittently going to visit his son who had a Brussels sprout farm. And the other thing that I think will bring joy to your heart is I suspect, thanks to my congenital heart disease and what I went through with that, I developed an autoimmune disease. And unfortunately, I've had to be on prednisone now for 9 years. I just can't get off the damn stuff. But my rheumatologist said to me, I tried vegan, I tried vegetarian, didn't seem to make much of a difference. And then actually it was a friend who made a comment about, well, you eliminated nightshades. And I sat there and I went, I don't know what nightshades are. And for those of you that also don't know, although you've heard me talk about it, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. And I specifically react really badly with tomatoes. So I'm also celiac, so I'm gluten-free, so I can help you with that. I got tons of recipes. And then I eliminated nightshades, and I was able to cut my prednisone dose in half.
Wow.
Just by eliminating nightshades. But
and I've heard a lot. I used to know a guy who was a bodybuilder, and he kind of said the same thing, that he specifically took out all nightshades from his diet. And he found that, because it's like the oxalic acid crystals and stuff, he was kind of saying that he felt so much better, that he was stronger, he lifted better, all these sorts of things. And I was like, wait, no tomatoes? What? I don't know.
It's really hard. And I went to Yvonne's from the South, and she did a really cool dinner. And I said to her, can you make anything that does not include tomatoes and peppers? And she very nicely did a very delicious mushroom thing it is tough, because tomato and pepper are used so frequently, if for no other reason than color.
Yeah.
And apparently I'm notorious or infamous at my rheumatologist's office, because in her whole practice, she's out of Bryn Mawr, I am the only patient that any of the doctors has gone off of nightshades and successfully. But my prednisone dose went from 10 milligrams down to 5.
Wow, that's really great.
So I'm a big proponent and a big pusher of nightshade free, if for no other reason that it'll open up more times for me to be able to go to somebody else's house.
Well, she just mentioned mushrooms. So I have a quick question about mushrooms, because you also mentioned mushrooms at one point, and I know they're incredibly healthy. And everybody always says shiitakes, and when I use a lot of shiitakes, and are there other types of mushrooms that have the protective qualities? Because I mean, can just regular little button mushrooms, will that give you the same effect?
Yes. So there was actually a recent study that came out of Penn State in Hershey. They did a dietary study. So they looked at people, and they found that by just adding, I think it was a quarter of a cup, like a very, very small amount of mushrooms to your diet, decreased cancer by 20% or something. It was a lot. I was actually really surprised. And what they kind of found, though, it's button mushrooms have this component to it. Your portobellos have the component to it. Now your shiitakes are going to have more compared to your white button mushrooms, but they all still have all those good benefits to them. In terms of like other types of medicinal mushrooms, so like turkey tail mushrooms and reishi mushrooms, both of those guys are not really cooking mushrooms because they're too woodsy. But those have a lot of really good information about them. Turkey tail is used a lot in cancer. There's a lot of good information in breast cancer with turkey tail mushrooms. And
use it in a tea or an infusion?
So mushrooms are hard because they don't tincture well. So they have to do a like double extraction with them. So they have to do a water extraction process that's boiled. And then I think they take the mushrooms, and then there's a alcohol extraction to it as well. Usually with mushrooms, it's a double extraction just because it doesn't extract well compared to other agents. So you can get it in a pill, you can get it in a tincture. A lot of times too, now, if you've seen like the mushroom coffees, those are just powdered mushrooms, right? And so like lion's mane mushroom has actually some information to suggest that it's good for cognition. They did a study where they looked at students that were studying for an exam and they gave them lion's tail mushroom and they found that they had more cognition, more retention compared to students that didn't have lion's mane mushroom. So that's another one. And that one actually, you can eat lion's mane. That one you can find, that one's more of a specialty mushroom. But let's see, turkey tail, and what was the other one I said? Yeah, generally you can get like a 10 mushroom or like an extended mushroom kind of mix is usually the ones that I buy when I buy mushroom supplements, because I want all of them. I want reishi and I want turkey tail and I want all the good things, because yeah, we do know that mushrooms actually are really, the reason that they're good in cancer is because they boost your immune system. So they help with any kind of immune system trouble that you might have, is great for mushrooms as well.
And they actually make capsules with mushroom
Yeah.
in it. Wow.
Yeah. There's I get one that has like 10 different mushrooms in it. So it's got a little bit of everything. It's got the shiitake and the cordyceps and the reishi and the turkey tail and all the things.
And can you walk into a regular pharmacy and get that, or is that like a GNC or a specialty?
Yeah, I usually order mine online. I get mine from there's a place out in Portland or Seattle. It's like Northwest somewhere. Let me see if I can find my email and I'll find North Spore.
Because I love having a personal recommendation.
Yeah.
North Spore.
Yeah, I think that's the one it's called.
That's a great name. That's a great
name for mushrooms.
Especially in the Northwest too.
Right, North Spore. Yeah,
North Spore,
they
okay.
have mushroom extract blends. They actually have some really cool mushroom fruiting kits that you can do from your home. So they come in like a little bag that's got the rhizome in it and all the growing medium, and all you do is just open it up and then you can get oyster mushrooms, all kinds of stuff. It's really kind of fun because they kind of just grow on their own. You just put them in a corner and you mist them, and they're pretty fun for your kitchen.
Oh wow, I had no idea about that.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. But I assume they have to be in a dark, moist corner somewhere? Like
no, actually, once the mushrooms start fruiting, then they can tolerate light.
Interesting, because just where I have it set out on my patio, there's a fair amount of light. But that would be cool. And so you basically already answered one of my other questions, which was, it sounds like the benefits of mushrooms are not affected by whether or not they're cooked.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's these polysaccharides and things that are in the mushrooms that they don't seem to be, they're not heat sensitive. So if you cook them or not, either way, they seem to be just as beneficial.
Great.
I have one more question, Jenna.
Sure.
If you could pick one vegetable in the whole world to eat, which would be the most health producing vegetable?
Broccoli.
Love broccoli.
Because
roasted, tossed in a little olive oil, roasted. It's great.
Yeah, your cruciferous vegetables, broccoli in particular, actually has a component to it that's called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane, they've done a lot of research to look at it because it's an anti-inflammatory type of agent. So it kind of has similar properties to like turmeric. But for me, when I'm thinking about turmeric in my cancer patients, I worry about platelets and I worry about drug interactions with turmeric. The sulforaphane doesn't seem to have those types of troubles. And you can get sulforaphane in a supplement, but if you eat broccoli, there's a heck of a lot, and broccoli sprouts in particular, which you can sprout right on your counter, which are really easy to do.
And so what would be your second favorite vegetable?
I'm a green leafy girl. So if I was to pick something else, I'd go for like kale or spinach. I'm really into those guys for sure.
I'm a huge spinach eater. And my most common breakfast is, instead of avocado toast, I actually use a portobello mushroom and then do avocado and egg. And my INR started to like consistently be down. And I looked it up, and apparently I've been eating enough mushrooms and avocado that the amount of vitamin K, even though it's not a lot in those, was what was throwing off my INR. But and as you said, the consistency, that's what I would say to people all the time. If you're going to have 3 salads a week, it has to be 3 salads every week. It can't be 10. Yeah.
Hey, Jenna, can you, I know we're gonna have to close it up. Can you put back up on the screen your contact information?
Sure, I can definitely do that.
Okay.
How did you pick the name Wobbly Arrow?
Oh, Scott asked me that question too. So,
I asked you that
love
question already,
arrows.
Lori.
Yeah. This is actually, it's a longer story. So I love arrows. I actually have this tattoo on my arm. That's an arrow that I got before I went through yoga teacher training. And I'm a Sagittarius rising. So the Sagittarius is the archer. And I love the idea of an arrow. An arrow, in my view, is a journey. So the arrow itself is the journey. We don't, the point of the arrow is where it's going. The tail is where it's been, but the arrow itself is the journey. And so I was in the shower one morning thinking about what I wanted to call my business. And I saw those arrow tattoos. And for some reason, this idea of weeble wobbles came into my mind. So this idea that like weeble wobbles, they wobble, but they don't fall over. And wobbly is that idea. Like life is wobbly. There are, we know that not everything is just as simple as we think it is going to be. And so, your life is wobbly. But I found out later that there's this idea that's called the archer's paradox. So when you look at an arrow that is going straight, it looks like it's wobbling as it goes through the air. And so to me, that just emphasizes this idea that even though we think that life is wobbly, even though we feel like we may not be going down the right path, you really are, and you're really in the right place.
Oh, that's great. That's an awesome story.
Well, thank you.
It's an awesome story.
Well, I appreciate all of your wonderful questions. I thank you all so much for logging in. And I know it's before the work week, so it's time for a lot of us to go to bed, because I'm in that realm.
No, oh, that's right. Yvonne has to work more this week. I was going to say the rest of us are retired. I was forced into retirement, kicking and screaming, but Yvonne actually is working full-time this week, so she would appreciate that. But thank you very, very much, Jenna. This is very informative, and I like your manner, and not everybody would have been as gracious about having somebody else throw in that much stuff. And I actually have even more respect for you, because I find that the more that people know, the more they recognize that they may not know, and they don't have to get defensive about it. And so my estimation of you went up significantly, because that is not something that everybody can take. So major points.
Scott, you're muted.
I think he's on another call.
Thank you so much, Jenna. This was great.
So
very, very much.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy, send me an email. I'd be happy to continue answering them. If you're interested in working with me, again, I'd be happy to kind of chat with you guys about whatever it is that you're interested in, and just let me know.
Great. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jen.